prophecy was a tool to understand the past, the present, and to predict the future.
Malachy was supposed to have the vision, and he was supposed to have seen the popes who would reign over the church until the second coming.
Purportedly, what Malachy had created was a kind of prophecy over the course of the next 112 papacies.
Until the final one, the 112th line, that he names Petrus Romanus.
The whole way the Petrus Romanus is written is a time of trial and tribulation.
There's been evidence that either the prophecy was inspired or it's being followed like a roadmap.
It does seem to have a track record of predicting the future.
Pope Francis is the 112th pope. He is the final pope in the list. The people of all faiths and people of no faith are looking at world events today, and some are frightened by what they see happening. Others are scrambling to interpret the signs. And I think people just have a sense that prophecy is unfolding around the world. People have a sense that something is kind of unhinged right now.
Germans have figured out a way to increase water pressure by 15 times without using any energy. This new $80 jet pressure accelerator harnesses the cleaning force of a hydraulic power system. And its record-breaking success is leaving big names like Lowe's, Home Depot, and Amazon trailing behind. In just 30 days, it has sold 1.8 million units, none of which came through these big box stores. It's called Jet Sono, and it's been showcased several times by top networks such as Fox, MSNBC, ABC, CNN, and NBC. But restrictions may come soon, with growing debate over whether civilians should be allowed to handle such potent military-grade technology. While it's still legally available, thousands are rushing to get one before any restrictions are imposed. It was first developed for military use, where it was key for maintaining equipment and ensuring rapid decontamination in highly demanding situations. Hospitals eventually integrated the device into their cleaning protocols, relying on it for comprehensive sanitation to keep patients safe. Thanks to Jetsono's patented jet pressure accelerator, any regular hose can be upgraded to a military-grade powerhouse, tackling the hardest dirt and grime with ease. In less than 5 minutes, Jetsono allows you to easily clean even the most stubborn dirt and stains from your driveway, making it look brand new. It's safe to use on your home siding and your garage. Restore your patio, clean your windows, and restore your fence and car to its original glory. Plus, it fits any hose universally and attaches in seconds. And the best part? It's so easy anyone can use it regardless of age or strength. So why keep struggling with hours of strenuous scrubbing and exhausting labor? Let Jetsono do the heavy lifting and witness years of stains and grime effortlessly melt away in seconds. No hard work, no long hours, just perfect, pristine results. Since being featured on TV, Jetsono has sold 1.8 million units in just the last 30 days alone. You won't find Jetsono in stores like Lowe's, Home Depot, or even Amazon. It's available only on their official website. They're purposely bypassing big box stores so they can offer a fairer and lower price to the American public. And there's more good news. In exchange for your valuable feedback, Jetsono is giving away their pressure device to Americans over 50 years old for 50% off. In fact, thousands across America have already taken advantage of this opportunity. All it takes is a few quick questions and your shipping info, and the newest Jetsono will be on its way to you for 50% off. Remember, this deal won't last long and stock is flying off the shelves. The last time they did this, it sold out in under 4 hours. So why risk paying full price tomorrow when you can get it for 50% off today? Click the button below to get yours 50% off while stock is still available.
There was a moment there where I really thought I was going to pass out. Ready? Alright, I'd like to introduce you guys to Tariq Hoftai, who is a 12-year-old girl who lives in Coffee Village with her mother, father, 3 sisters, and brother.
Tariq is the oldest child in her family, and because of that, she spends a lot of her time helping out at home. Even though she loves attending school more than anything else, before she can do that, she has to finish her chores, which start the same way every morning, with walking to collect dirty water. I asked Tariq if I could go collect water with her because it's something I had never experienced myself. We talk about it a lot at Charity Water. Women in Ethiopia in particular spend hours every day walking to find and collect water. I know that, but now it's time for me to see what that's like.
Rush hour traffic on the morning commute.
Tariq's family lives on the very top of a hill, and though it only takes about 30 minutes to reach the bottom, when you factor in 90-degree heat and the 7,000-foot elevation, none of it is easy. This trickle of a stream is where 1,825 people come to collect their water. Tariq and I fill our jerry cans with 40 pounds of water and prepare to head back up to her house on the hill.
Show off. A little show off. Told her it wasn't a race. I just can't get. I can't get enough air. Let's go home.
Shrouded in mystery, alternately revered and reviled, a prophecy attributed to St Malachy, who lived in Ireland nearly a millennium ago, is the center of renewed interest in wide-reaching circles today.
There was an Irish saint by the name of Malachi O'Morgare who lived during the 1100s. Had a heart for the poor, had the gift of prophecy, had the gift of healing.
As the legend goes, Malachi made a pilgrimage to Rome in 1139 AD, where he had an audience with the Pope. After his meeting with the Pope, he had a vision.
And this is where tradition says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. And it was almost a judgmental prophecy. So the prophecy of the popes is that under inspiration, he writes down a series of 112 lines in Latin from the time of Pope Innocent II to the final pope, the 112th lines, each one of them signifying in order the next pope that would come along until the final one, the 112th line, that he names Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman.
The thing that makes this very interesting is that the vision of the very last pope involved what most biblical scholars would call the end times, and it seems to forecast the destruction of Rome even.
The final line in the prophecy of the Pope says, "There will sit Peter the Roman, who will nourish the sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the great and terrible judge will judge his people." The end.
Vastly different understandings are emerging of what the prophecy now portends.
There is a final prediction, and then there will be no Pope anymore. We don't know.
Pope Francis, who was just elected, is the 112th Pope. He is the final Pope in the list. Some believe that the prophecy of the popes is describing a man who, in one way or another, is going to help give rise to the Antichrist.
St Malachy's prophecy of the popes has long been a focal point of eschatological end-time study, both inside the Vatican and beyond. The prophecy was thrust back into heightened awareness when world events took an unexpected turn in February 2013.
Pope Benedict XVI will step down
Vatican City, a day unlike any other in the past 600 years.
When Benedict XVI resigned, it was just really a surprise, a shock, because it was the first time in our times that a pope resigned really, not just theoretically.
Following Pope Benedict's resignation, 115 cardinals from across the globe convened in Vatican City as the world watched and waited for the conclave to reveal who would assume the role as the next head of the Catholic Church. The result was heralded as a bold and timely choice.
1.2 billion Catholics rejoice as the 266th Pope is chosen. Jorge Murillo Bergoglio is his name. He's the first pontiff from the Americas, first non-European in almost 1,300 years. He's also the first Francis.
Well, you know, Pope Francis kind of caught us by surprise. I think he did a lot of people.
I think this is a major change for the church. The idea that, first of all, we can have a pope from another continent, a pope who's not based in Europe. This is a huge change.
Against the backdrop of the new pope, examining St Malachy's prophecy of the popes evokes varying perspectives on its pertinence.
I think the prophecy of the popes is very relevant.
I think amongst the man on the street that are interested in these sorts of things, that it's immensely popular and it's widely believed. In fact, you'll find a lot of Catholics that try to predict who the next pope's going to be based on the Malachi phrase. Historically, that's been going on for centuries.
The most significant thing, of course, is we've reached the end of it. And now the world is looking at it and they're wondering, is this going to be the Pope who will preside over the Catholic Church as the world enters into the Great Tribulation period?
Peter Bender, then head of religious education at a Cambridge college, wrote, "If we were to place the works of those who have repudiated the prophecies of Malachi on scales and balance them against those who have accepted them, we would probably reach a fair equilibrium. However, the most important factor, namely the popularity of the prophecies, particularly among the ordinary people, as distinct from scholars, makes them as relevant as they have ever been."
It doesn't matter whether or not it's true. It matters that people think it's true and that they act in light of it. So my guess is that Francis and the Vatican will have to deal with this in some way. And in dealing with it, they, in a sense, give credence to it. That makes for fascinating politics, remarkable, unpredictable undercurrents, and in an age when, quite frankly, the whole world is unsteady and in the midst of turmoil, just that additional little bit creates all the more uncertainty. Do I think we need to pay attention to it? Absolutely.
While Malachy's prophecy of the popes is cloaked in mystery, and while its legitimacy is both championed and refuted, what is clear is that its precision, particularly over the last 175 years, commands attention.
Taking a skeptical look at this, does it predict the future? Well, I think it does.
They have been investigated, and some people can see references either to the coats of arms or to the places they came from.
Some of them are very uncanny, and especially the last number.
In retrospect, a few of them can be applied with a certain amount of interest.
A lot of people have even commented how it seems to get more accurate the later in the prophecy that it gets.
In the face of ominous Petrus Romanus implications, many are turning an inquisitive eye to the Irishman associated with the prophecy of the popes.
What we know about Malachy comes from a series of hagiographies, which are biographies of saints. Perhaps the most reliable of all of the biographies was written by Bernard of Clairvaux, who was a contemporary of Malachy's.
St. Bernard's telling of Malachy's life reveals a venerated churchman who loved his country and his faith, one who left a far-reaching legacy in Ireland and beyond.
Well, Malachy is regarded as the second greatest Irish saint, just next to St Patrick.
He was born in 1094 in Armagh.
He was educated at the schools in Armagh attached to the monastery there.
So Malachy's beginnings were in Armagh and then to Bangor Abbey, which was the centre of excellence in Ireland but also in Europe.
Bangor Abbey was one of the most important abbeys of medieval Ireland.
He studied very hard, according to St Bernard, who was his biographer.
In those days, the Irish church was still largely split between those who held to the traditions of the old Celtic church and those who were much more oriented to the ecclesiology, the liturgy, and the hierarchy of Rome. And Malachy grew up in a home that was Roman.
And from that, at the age of 25, he was ordained to the priesthood, and that's when his whole career took off. The Irish church at that stage, the monasteries had grown quite lax, and whenever Malachy was growing up, he would have seen that. He was seen right from the very beginning as someone who was driven, that he had goals in mind, he had things that he knew that he wanted to achieve.
He winds up being one of the great reformers of the Roman Catholic Church in Ireland, consolidating authority under Rome.
I think that's one of the reasons why people still see Malachy as so pivotal, because Malachy's role at that stage, he revived what was essentially a very stale and probably dying church in Ireland.
Malachy's desire to integrate the church in Ireland with Rome continued to grow. Soon it became clear that a journey would be necessary.
Ireland was a place where so many of the documents of ancient Christendom were preserved during the so-called Dark Ages that created chaos on the continent when Rome was really almost a ghost town. The Irish church was the preserver of so much of that legacy. And then here comes this sort of heroic figure who brings that treasure trove of Celtic independence and all of those glorious documents under the authority of Rome.
Obviously, Ireland's right on the boundary of Europe, right on the edge, and Rome was somewhere so distant that nothing really penetrated into the Irish church from what was coming out of Rome. So Malachy's goal then was to travel to Rome to ask the Pope to rubber stamp all of the reforms that he had made, to emphasize that fact that we are not this little church on its own. We are part of a wider church which has someone else who is the pivot. So that's why then Malachy headed off to Rome. In those days, it wasn't a 2-hour flight. It was a very, very long journey, and Malachy would have stopped in various places as he went along. One of those places was the Abbey at Clairvaux. He met the abbot, St Bernard, and immediately they became extremely close friends.
St Bernard was the leading churchman of Europe at the time. He was famous for his sanctity, his sermons and his writings. He saw in St Malachy a kindred spirit. He was taken by St Malachy's tremendous dedication to spreading the gospel.
And Malachy stayed with Bernard for a while. He then travelled on to Rome.
He makes this 11-month journey across Europe. He sees the poor, he sees the plagues that are troubling so much of the world at that time. It's a frightening journey, all kinds of peril, all kinds of risks, but he takes the trip. And he finally, 11 months later, he winds up at Rome. He comes into the Vatican, he comes into the palace of the Pope, and he sees the opulence, he sees the regalia, he sees the robes, he sees the gold and silver, how leaders of the Vatican were embellishing themselves at a time when there was so much suffering in the world around him. So he gives his update on his diocese, but he's troubled in his spirit. And as he's coming up out of the city of Rome, something happens.
Legend holds that Malachy left the prophecy with Pope Innocent. He then returned to Ireland with new zeal, including a determination to introduce European-influenced architecture into the religious realm in Ireland. It wasn't long before he devised another trip to the Vatican.
Malachy then instituted another series of reforms, and he then was travelling to Rome again. And of course he would stop at Clairvaux.
When he arrived at Clairvaux, he was apparently quite weak and exhausted.
And Bernard cared for him.
In November of 1148, at the age of 54, after a lifetime of unpretentious service to the Church and its laity, the man who changed the face of Catholicism in Ireland passed away quietly in the presence of his closest friend.
And then St Bernard, of course, preached about his life in the service of Requiem for his death.
While legend holds that the prophecy of the popes was given to St Malachy in the 1100s, for many, a curious question of its whereabouts thereafter gives rise to doubt.
There is a kind of a dubious nature to the origin of the prophecies. As the legend goes, it was stashed away in the Vatican library, but nobody can really prove any of these things.
Some scholars conclude that it was taken into the Vatican. It was held in mystical esteem by at least some members of the hierarchy of the Vatican, and it was hidden away like so many other documents throughout history have been there in the archives.
It was allegedly given in 1139, and it's published in 1595 by Arnold de Wyon.
Could have even been a mistake when it was published. He was a Benedictine historian, and he may have simply taken it upon himself to take it out of the archives and to put it into print. But the idea was that it was hidden away, stowed away inside the Vatican for those 400 plus years.
That's a big gap.
Questions abound as to the preservation of the prophecy's authenticity.
There's some evidence that there was some tampering with the early part of it.
Malachy's initial mottos in the prophecy of the popes correspond with the pope's birthplaces, family names, personal arms, and pre-papal titles. The first motto, Ex Castra Tiberis, from a castle on the Tiber, befits Pope Celestine II's birthplace in Città di Castello on the banks of the Tiber.
But we took a very critical view of the prophecy of the popes, and we found significant evidence that pre-1595, when it was published in Lignum Vitae, that the document had been altered.
A concern among some researchers is that the mottos during the years the prophecy went missing are essentially identical to those chronicled by renowned Italian historian Onufrius Panvinius, who didn't live until the middle part of the 16th century, strongly suggesting that the first part of the prophecy was plagiarized.
Tutti questi motti fino al 1590.
All of these mottos until 1590, that is until a few years before Wian published the prophecy. These are all very identifiable with all the popes from 1143, beginning with Celestine II until 1590.
Al 1590, per cui
Therefore, it is curious that a prophet could identify so well with the mottos, with the popes, for 400 years.
bene con I motti.
This is a very extraordinary element.
Questo è un elemento veramente straordinario.
In fact, too much of it seems to be too perfect, if you will.
This document purported to be from the 12th century, then lost in the Vatican archives, suddenly re-emerged during this time of great turmoil.
Profezia di Malachia
The prophecy of Malachi arrives at the end of the 1500s. That is, in a time of great problems. 60 or 70 years later comes the Protestant Reformation. There was the Council of Trent, the Counter-Reformation. It was a very difficult time for the papacy.
Scholars have varying opinions as to the cause and timing of any tampering, adaptation, or forgery of the initial portion of Malachi's prophecy. The most common understanding, however, is that Cardinal Simoncelli had the prophecy modified to support his papal aspirations.
It came to light in 1590, just prior to one of 4 papal conclaves over the course of about 15 months.
There was a cardinal from Orvieto, in Latin is Urbs Vetus, the older town.
Ed è un certo
A certain Simoncelli, Girolamo Simoncelli, who was from Orvieto and had been a bishop,
who tried to be elected as a new pope.
It was a time of great turmoil, as you might expect, with papal administrations coming and going faster than anyone could calculate.
And he wanted to support his pretension with some strong argument. What is stronger than something coming from the outer world? A prophecy is a strong argument.
One theory is that Simoncelli enlisted the assistance of a colleague in his scheme.
Che l'autore fosse questo grande, geniale.
The author could have been this great, ingenious falsifier, Alfonso Ceccarelli, who was very connected to the Monaldeschi family of Orvieto. He was a contemporary of Cardinal Simoncelli. The problem is that this Ceccarelli was beheaded because of matters connected to his work regarding the falsification of documents, papal, imperial, historical papers, and more.
Pontifici, imperiali, cronache, e via dicendo.
With the papal succession in disarray, St Malachy's prophecy of the popes emerged with its 112 mottos from Pope Celestine II until the end, Petrus Romanus.
And just in the middle, there was a prophecy which is exactly fitting to this person and not anybody else.
And so it was seen all the more miraculous. I mean, 4 centuries have passed, and suddenly here's this incredible insight into this particular moment.
When Malachy's prophecy was published, it revealed that the following pope would be ex antiquitate urbis, from the Old City. But things turned out different than Cardinal Simoncelli, who hailed from Orvieto, which in Latin is Urbe Vetanum, the Old City, may have planned.
this person was not elected. You know the story, you enter in the conclave as a pope and you get out as a cardinal, and that was exactly the case.
But beyond any conflicting interpretations of what may have happened to St Malachy's prophecy of the popes during its first 400 years, what's happened since then is where the real mystery begins.
It takes on a completely different kind of feel after it's published and put into the public venue in 1595. And so we concluded that anything prior to its publication in 1595 was not trustworthy. However, prophecies since 1595 also seem to be uncanny in terms of their prophetic fulfillment.
One mystery of the prophecy of the popes is the phenomenon that the mottos appear to be increasingly accurate as time goes on, particularly in the last 150 years.
Pope Pius IX, the motto for him was a cross from a cross, and that is pretty accurate in the fact that Pope Pius IX had a few run-ins with the House of Savoy. King Victor Emmanuel II, he basically took the papal states off the Pope, and the Pope was a prisoner in the Vatican. So this really was a cross from a cross, because the House of Savoy, the coat of arms, was a cross.
Leo XIII was lumen in cielo, light in the sky, and it's clear on his papal coat of arms there's a comet.
I was born poor, I have lived poor, and I wish to die poor. The words of Pope Pius X reflect a man who was consumed with returning the Catholic Church to authentic Christian values. His zeal for promoting traditional devotional practices and orthodox theology distinguished his pontificate. Various methods are being employed by different researchers and historians in their pursuit of the truth about Malachy's prophecy of the popes.
The way the scientific method works is you develop a hypothesis, and you don't try to prove the hypothesis, you try to disprove it, you try to falsify it. It's easy to find some kind of confirming evidence if you go fishing around. And a lot of these prophecies, I think that's a valid criticism. It's easy to see that, well, they don't always refer to the same thing. Sometimes it's the heraldry, the coat of arms. Sometimes it's his name, something about where he's from. So I think that's a valid criticism, that a lot of them seem like they don't have a precise reference. But there was one prophecy in particular that takes a risky position, and that was the prophecy for Benedict XV.
His reference is religio depopulata, religion pulled apart and destroyed.
Religion depopulated. Now that's a bold prediction, because all things being equal, you wouldn't expect religion to be depopulated. You know, it might go up, down a little bit. The church might grow. It might fall off. But that's a risky prediction. It's easily falsifiable. You know, if nothing had happened during his reign, I think this prophecy would have been falsified. But what happens in Benedict XV's reign? That he's the Pope from 1914 to 1922. This was the onset of World War I, which is devastating. In the Soviet Union, in Russia, we see the Bolshevik Revolution. This is the beginning of militant atheism. This is the time they say that 200 million people left the church. Probably more than any other time in history, religion is depopulated. Exactly when this prophecy predicted hundreds of years before.
As an impending global conflict was growing closer to explosion, Pope Pius XI remained firm in his deepest convictions, known for his vehement opposition to communism and fascism. In the face of challenges from Hitler and Mussolini, Pius was steadfast in proclaiming the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. With the recent appointment of Pope Francis to the Holy See, many Catholic scholars and leaders dismiss the legitimacy of Malachy's prophecy. Such has not always been the case.
Pius XII, at the middle of the 20th century, he was corresponding to the label Pastor Angelicus, that is the angel pope.
He's really the one that stands as the supreme counterexample to any Catholic scholars who want to argue that they don't take this seriously.
And it applied quite perfectly to him and to his role during the Second World War.
because he actually produced a documentary film about himself. You know, he was intimately involved in this project.
And the title was exactly The Angel Pope.
And they even said how he lives out, how he exemplifies a day in the life of St. Malachy's angelic shepherd. This was the heading for the film. Now, the Catholic Church has had 400 years to make a statement disputing this thing or dismissing it. But here we have one of their infallible popes who obviously claimed it to himself. Now, that begs an explanation from any scholar that wants to dismiss it.
There's a story told in the 1950s. This was after the death of Pius XII. Whenever the prophecies were beginning to become more popular, Cardinal Spellman of New York read the prophecies, and the prophecy for it was Pastor et Nautica, shepherd and sailor. And Cardinal Spellman hired a flock of sheep, put them in a boat, and sailed them on a river. I've heard the Tiber and I've heard the Hudson, I don't know which.
Despite what some say was Spellman's apparent effort to propagate the idea that his election as Pope would be a fulfillment of Malachy's prophecy, the conclave did not conclude with Cardinal Spellman announced as the next Pope. According to some, however, the prophecy was, in fact, fulfilled.
When John the 23rd was elected, the sentence was Pastor et Nauta.
He was actually the patriarch of Venice, which is the city of the famous nautical street system.
So, the motto regarding John the 23rd in the succession of the prophecy is Pastor et Nauta. Nauta is the navigator. Then it worked well.
For detractors of the prophecy, the ambiguity found in the mottos relating to a pope's coat of arms is cause for concern. Others see this differently.
Paul VI, he's Pope 1963 to 1978. And this is one that's heraldry. It's about the coat of arms. This is actually really an art and a science in Roman Catholicism, really important in the medieval period for royalty and popes and anyone of note that you have a coat of arms. The prophecy for him is Flos Florum, flower of flowers. It sounds pretty simple, kind of vague, right? But when you look at his coat of arms, it has 3 fleur-de-lis. Now, this is a French monarchy symbol that means flower of the lily. And that's really the whole coat of arms. My thinking was, well, maybe he saw that coming. He saw the Malachi prophecy, and he picked his coat of arms to match it. But I did some research on that. When you become a bishop, you have to have your coat of arms in place. And when you look at the timelines in these guys' careers, most of them are bishops 30 years before they're ever even eligible to be a pope, minimum of a 20 or so. So if you think about the sort of guesswork, you'd have to get really lucky to figure out how many popes would be between you and your eligibility and when he would die. And, it doesn't seem that possible to manipulate it that way. This prophecy really stunningly seems to describe his coat of arms when it says flower of the lily. One of the ones that's it's kind of eerie is John Paul I. This was the famous year of 3 popes. In 1978, Paul VI died. They elected John Paul I. Well, he actually ascended to the papacy on the day of a half moon. But what makes it even more chilling is he only lived 1 lunar cycle, because he died after 33 days in office. And then John Paul II was elected. So we had 1 year with 3 popes.
His reference was De Labore Solis, from the labor of the sun.
And this was the motto for Pope John Paul II, who was born during a partial solar eclipse, and then actually died and was buried in 2005 during a rare hybrid eclipse, and so through the labor of the sun. Then the next line 111, this is the phrase Gloria Olivae, or the glory of the olive.
A lot of the Catholics who study this prophecy and try to predict the Pope had been expecting a candidate to arise from the Benedictine monastic order, because the prophecy was a glory of the olive. The Benedictine order has an olive branch as their symbol, and there's a group of Benedictines called the Olivetans. So they were really kind of forecasting, well, we expect a Benedictine. Well, Cardinal Ratzinger was not a Benedictine at all, and he he's elected Pope. And so, well, yes, the Malachi prophecy was wrong.
Then lo and behold, we find out that Ratzinger was born on the feast day of St. Benedict and took to himself the name Benedict the 16th, which of course relates to the Benedictine order, the Olivetans, as they're also called, and whose symbol is the olive branch. So once again, it was an astonishing fulfillment of prophecy. He fulfills the prophecy in numerous ways. George Bergoglio, Pope Francis I, seems to be a very likable and humble individual, and one would want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But there have been, even among Catholic scholars, those who believed that at the tribulation period, Rome would be apostate.
The question at hand is whether the arrival of Pope Francis is further confirmation that the world is at the edge of an apocalyptic age.
There's been the thought for some time that some type of either prophetic or occultic energy has been focusing cultures around the world for hundreds of years, and in some cases for thousands of years, looking at the end of 2012 and the beginning of 2013 as a new dispensation in time. And at the same time, we have the arrival of the final Pope.
For many, the timing of Benedict's abdication and Francis's ascension must be viewed in light of other signs consistently pointing to a particular era on the calendar.
During our investigation into the prophecy of the popes, my co-author uncovered a book that had been written 61 years ago, 1951.
The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes by René Thibault. He was a Belgian Jesuit university professor at the University of Namur.
It was important because it was written by a Catholic academic who believed in the prophecy of the popes.
Now, he did all sorts of mystical calculations, and then he ended up doing all these mathematical equations. He kept ending in the year 2012. Now, one of the simple ways that he calculated it is he just determined the average papal reign to be 11 years. He thought the authentic portion of the text began in 1572. From that point forward, there were 40 popes left on the list. So 11 times 40 is 440 years, plus 1572 is 2012. He did this from 5 or 6 different angles and came up with the same date. April of 2012, exactly, specifically, is what he said. So he's saying the final Petrus Romanus arrives in April 2012. If his book had been recent, I would have thought this guy is just making up a bunch of fanciful nonsense to land in the year 2012. But his book was copyright 1951.
If you look at the end of the Mayan calendar, the Maya never predicted the end of the world. What they predicted was that the end of 2012 would be the end of what we would call a dispensation and the dawn of a new age. And the Maya weren't alone. The Aztecs said the same thing. The Cherokee Indian tribe 200 years ago, in what is called the Chickamauguan Star Constellation Prophecies, predicted that their calendar would end in 2012 and roll over into a new era, a new dawn, a new time on Earth. A lot of people don't know that the reformers in the 1700s, in the 1800s, dozens of them, including Jonathan Edwards, old sinners in the hands of an angry God, Jonathan Edwards, predicted that the false prophet and the Antichrist would arrive between the years 2012 and 2016. There's another strange connection between the year 2012, 2013, and the prophecy of the popes. Even rabbis that I have spoke with are unfamiliar with the fact that in the Zohar, the most important work of Jewish Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, it was written 700 years ago in medieval Aramaic. And in a section of the Zohar called the Be'era section, there is a subsection called Signs Heralding Mashiach, or the coming of the Messiah. And 700 years ago, these Jewish priests predicted when the Messiah would arrive on earth. Now, because Orthodox Jews did not accept Jesus as their Messiah, we would accept this prediction as forecasting the coming of the Antichrist. And again, you can see this mysticism combining 2012 with 2013, forecasting the coming of the Antichrist in the Jewish prophecies and the final pope in the Catholic prophecies for the same period of time, one a 700-year-old prediction, the other allegedly 900 years old.
With the passing of 2012, many were left wondering whether Nostradamus and others mistook the significance of that particular year.
You know, the year 2012 came and went, and, we didn't see a new pope. And so we figured, well, Father Rene Thibault was wrong. But then, February 11th, 2013, Pope Benedict shocks the world as the first pope in nearly 600 years to step down.
We learned, however, in February of 2013, that the Pope actually officially resigned at the end of March 2012.
Right when this Belgian Jesuit said he would, 60 years ahead of time.
One central point of contention in the prophecy of the Pope's debate is simply the name of the final Pope on Malachy's list.
Many people were hung up on the title Peter the Roman, or in Latin Petrus Romanus, and thought that the final pope would have to be somebody who had the Christian name Peter somewhere as some part of his name.
Whenever Pope Benedict abdicated, one of the immediate cardinals who was seen as likely to be elected was Cardinal Turkson of Ghana, who was Peter. Also, Pope Benedict abdicated on the feast of St Romanus. So if it had have come into that, then of course maybe looked at it a wee bit, good God, that really coincides.
But we had given interviews saying that it would be a mistake to try to nail down the last pope having the Christian name Peter, that in fact the only thing that it would take to fulfill the prophecy would be a cardinal of Italian descent. And lo and behold, George Bergoglio, Italian descent, both parents full-blooded Italians, or in the old language, Romans. But he names himself after Francis of Assisi. Now this is a Catholic friar who lived in the late 1100s and the early 1200s, but his name of birth was Giovanni Pietro di Pietro Peter de Bernardone. He was an Italian or a Roman in the old language, a man whose name can literally be translated Peter the Roman. So to take that as a namesake, well, it was intriguing to say the least.
While denials of the legitimacy of the prophecy are understandable with its current implications, until recently those ramifications were in fact anticipated.
This is the first generation of Protestants, as well as a great number of Catholics who did not believe that the Antichrist would find his seat at the Vatican in Rome. Certainly the Reformers believed that, and up until 50 or 60 years ago, that was a common eschatology. What many Catholics don't know is that was also a common belief among their greatest scholars, Cardinal Henry Manning, Cardinal Hele, Salvador Zola, and in more recent years, men like Malachi Martin. So these are from within Catholicism, people, scholars, highly educated men, including Jesuits, who believed that the time would come when a final pope would be the false prophet of biblical fame and would help give rise to the Antichrist.
From my perspective, the most important thing that any of us can do in light of any prophecy is to do our job, to undertake those things that we know that we're called to do, to obey those things that we know we are supposed to obey, to fulfill our calling.
May our faith in the risen Christ enable us to be living signs in our world of the triumph of life and hope over evil, sin, and death. His Holiness will now, in Italian, offer his greetings to the English-speaking pilgrims and visitors.
People of all faiths and people of no faith are looking at world events today, and some are frightened by what they see happening. Others are scrambling to interpret the signs. Others, however, are excited because for them, this heralds the imminency of the return of Jesus Christ. And perhaps that fact alone could be a unifying factor among all the different Christian denominations, Catholics and Protestants. And if we can take anything from what we're talking about right now, I would think that hopefully it encourages the church to unify. The world right now is thinking about God, they're thinking about prophecy, they're thinking about the end times. But if all of that could encourage us to once again become preachers of the Word, to focus on the gospel, and also to even focus on what unites us in that effort to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, I believe that what's happening right now could actually lead to a great awakening, a great revival.